Good day everyone! Today our group will be presenting on one of the most influential thinkers in political and economic history, Karl Marx. So the first question to be asked is, who is Karl Marx? He was born in 1818 in Prussia and was not only a philosopher but also a political economist, writer, and revolutionary. Though often viewed as an activist, his ideas have deeply shaped the way we understand class, power, and inequality. Marx is best known for his works, the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, which laid the foundation for the ideology of communism. His theories inspired political movements and revolutions throughout the 20th century, changing the course of global history. Marx's thought emerged during a time of rapid industrialization and rising capitalist economies, where social inequalities became more apparent. He critically examined the economic structures that maintained class divisions and sought to highlight the exploitation of the working class. Rather than accepting these social systems as natural or permanent, Marx argued for radical change. His legacy continues to spark debate and analysis, making him an essential figure in the study of jurisprudence and social theory. I will now be talking about Marx's key ideas on class. So Marx defined classes as groups of individuals who hold a similar role within the social division of labor and have a common relationship to the means of production. This means that the function or role that a person plays in the production process determines his position in the society. According to Marx, the two main classes in a fully developed capitalist society are the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Other classes such as the Lerman proletariat, petty bourgeoisie, landlords and peasants do exist, but they are not fundamental to the dynamics of capitalism. The bourgeoisie, also known as the capitalists, is the owners of the means of production. They use their capital to purchase labor power from the proletariat and profit by extracting the surplus value from the workers' efforts. This exploitation allows them to accumulate more wealth and maintain their dominant economic position. As a result, the bourgeoisie form a ruling class in a capitalist society, holding both economic and political power. The proletariat refers to wage workers who lack any means of production. All they have is the capacity to work, which they must trade with the bourgeoisie to make their livings. I will now pass the floor to CHERYL.
According to Marx, there are three elements to exploitation. First, using someone like a tool or a natural resource. Second, as a result, the person being used suffers harm. And third, it benefits the one who uses them. The work of the proletariat can be divided into two categories. First, necessary wage labor, where the work they do to produce goods equals to the goods they need to survive. And second, surplus wage labor, where the work they do to produce goods that are worth more than these subsistence items. The proletariat is exploited because the bourgeoisie always keep wages low to maximize their profits, taking the surplus value the proletariat created without fair compensation, making the proletariat remains poor. Therefore, surplus labor is also described as unpaid labor. This cycle prevents the proletariat from owning their property and ensures continuous exploitation. Class conflict arises from unequal distribution of resources, power, and status, leading to social change. As Marx stated, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. This struggle stems from the opposition between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeoisie maintains its power by oppressing the proletariat, eventually leading to class polarization. Marx viewed every class struggle as political, with the ruling class gaining political power to protect their property and maintain their status. Capitalism survives as long as the proletariat remains unaware of their shared oppression. The proletariat will eventually realize such oppression when they become too poor and miserable due to the exploitation. This is known as the class consciousness. Class consciousness is essential to their liberation, where freedom is not a gift but something that has to be responsibly and persistently pursued. Revolution is the only path to liberate the proletariat from bourgeoisie's oppression. It aims to create a society where workers have control and their interests are prioritized. However, such a revolution may be challenging as the bourgeoisie would not surrender their power and status easily. Therefore, uniting among the proletariat is essential to overthrow capitalism. Marx believed that capitalism would eventually collapse, making proletarian victory inevitable. After its fall, a dictatorship of the proletariat would reshape the society, leading to a classless society. In this system, the means of production shift from private to collective ownership, ending exploitation. This indicates that the society becomes communist, where people contribute to the society based on their capabilities and receive only what they need, eliminating class divisions and oppression.
So now I'll be presenting on Marx's sociology and political legacy and Weber's critique. After exploring Marx's core ideology, we'll look deeper into his views on society and politics and how other scholars have responded to his theories. Marx's ideas were heavily influenced sociology, especially through conflict theory, which highlights how power and resources are unequally distributed. He believed that capitalism created deep inequalities and alienation and saw communism as the solution, calling for an end to private ownership and a revolution by the working class. Unlike Plato's idealistic utopia, Marx's vision was grounded in real-world change. One of his well-known critiques was Max Weber. While Marx argued that economic forces shape all of society, Weber believed that ideas, cultures, and religion were just as powerful. His famous work, The Protestant Ethic, linked to the rise of capitalism to religious beliefs, especially in Calvinism, which viewed wealth as a sign of spiritual salvation. Weber also had a broader view of class, factoring in status, lifestyle, and cultural identity, not just subject to wealth. While Marx called for revolution, Weber focused on describing social complexity, and some scholars argue that this made Weber's view less likely to inspire collective action and more aligned with gradual reform than radical change. Weber also had a broader view of class, factoring in status, lifestyle, and cultural identity, not just subject to wealth. While Marx called for revolution, Weber focused on describing social complexity, and some scholars argue that this made Weber's view less likely to inspire collective action and more aligned with gradual reform than radical change. Still, despite their differences, both shared deep concerns about capitalism's impact. Marx warned of alienation from labor, while Weber described the iron cage of bureaucracy, while the freedom is lost to rules and efficiency. Now, with that said, I'd like to pass on to Varman to discuss on the criticism by other scholars such as Karl Popper. Thank you.
Next, we're looking at one of Karl Marx's most well-known critics, philosopher of science Karl Popper. Popper did not reject Marxism due to political biasness or opposition to equality. In fact, he was originally sympathetic to Marxism. But over time, Popper saw a serious problem, not just in how Marxism worked in practice, but in the way it was constructed as a theory. As a young man, Popper admired Marxism's promise of a scientific understanding of history, which could explain and even predict social and economic change. However, later, notably as Popper developed his principle of falsifiability, he started to question Marxism's scientific status. Popper believed that a theory is scientific only if it can be tested and potentially be proven wrong. If a theory can never be shown to be false, then it is not scientific, it is ideological. Popper also criticized what Marx called utopian social engineering. This is the idea that society can and should be completely redesigned from the top down, based on a fixed plan or ideology. Popper argued that this kind of thinking leads to repression. If one is trying to build a perfect system, anyone who disagrees may be seen as a threat and suppressed. Popper was not the only one who was concerned about Marxism's authoritarian tendencies. One of the most powerful critiques also came from Leszek Kotakowski, a former Marxist who became one of its most thoughtful opponents. First, Kotakowski's criticism revolved around morality. By the 1960s, he began to seriously question how Marxist ideology was being used to justify violence, purges, censorship, and repression, all in the name of building a classless society. In his famous lecture, What is Socialism?, he challenged the idea that historical goals could excuse immoral actions. He argued that socialism must be a movement for freedom, not just a method for redistributing wealth. If it loses that moral core, it becomes indistinguishable to tyranny. Second, Khodorkovsky shifted from revolutionary idealism to what he called ethical realism. Initially drawn to Marxism's promise of human emancipation, Khodorkovsky later changed after experiencing living under a socialist regime in post-war Poland. After witnessing those Marxist ideals led not to liberation but to dogma, bureaucracy, and authoritarianism, he developed a more skeptical and humanistic outlook, arguing that no single ideology, not even Marxism, can explain the full complexity of human life. He called for a philosophy of limits, one that acknowledges the falsibility of all systems. Khodorkovsky's critique of Marx was both philosophical and moral. He reminded us that the greatest danger in political theory is not just being wrong, but believing that you are always right. Therefore, his critique of Marx still matters today.
Moving on, Michel Foucault has later offered stronger critique. He rejected Marxism's totalizing narrative, the idea that all of history and society can be explained through class struggle and economic stages. Foucault argued that institutions like prisons and asylums should be understood on their own terms rather than solely as reflections of underlying economic forces. Similar to Max Weber, he rejected historical determinism, calling Marxism's belief in an inevitable communist future intellectually limiting. Additionally, Foucault disagrees with Marx, who sees power primarily as a tool of class domination tied to economic structures. Foucault views it as something that flows through all relationships and institutions. Power is not limited to class but operates in schools, hospitals, prisons, and everyday life. While Marx aims to abolish power through revolution, Foucault argues that power is unavoidable but can be resisted and reshaped. In short, while Marx intends to transform society through class revolution, thinkers like Weber and Foucault redefine the forces that shape it, ultimately challenging the limits of economic determinism. As seen from the discussion, Marx's theory remains foundational but is contested. His ideas laid down the basis for a revolutionary viewpoint on capitalism, social change, and class conflict. It challenged dominant ideologies and provided a radical reimagining of social organization through collective ownership and revolution. This raises a question as to whether Marxism can still explain the 21st century class dynamics. It seems fair to say that the concepts of Marxists will only remain relevant if individuals discuss, adapt, and reframe them for the modern day. In simple terms, Marx theories requires updating to better adjust and adapt to address contemporary issues such as gig economy, exploitation, algorithmic control, and the financialization of everyday life. Concepts like contradictory class positions and intersectionality demonstrates how Marxism can evolve and apply in more complex social realities. All in all, Marx is still regarded as a prominent and important person in the study of sociology. Later conflict theories like intersectional theory, gender conflict theory, and racial conflict theory were made possible by his contribution to the field. These theories help sociologists better comprehend exploitation, freedom, power, and control in society. Though obviously, Marx's theories may not explain everything, it remains a foundational tool and an interesting topic to be discussed for analyzing power, inequality, and social change in the modern world. That is all from us. Thank you.